Hey, how's it going, Math 1 kids? Welcome to the first lesson for Unit 1. Unit 1 deals with functions and their variables. So, today's lesson, 1.1, we're mainly going to be dealing with independent and dependent variables. You've probably heard of those two things before. I believe they were first introduced somewhere in middle school. So, much of what we're doing right now should be review. If you don't remember it off the top of your head, that's okay. That's what this is for, to kind of refresh your mind a little bit. So the learning objectives for today, just one. We want to identify independent and dependent variables in situations. All right. Now, before we jump to the first problem, let's talk a little bit about what these things are. Now, I will tell you this. Since we are not in class, I can't give you note packets. I can't give you note sheets. So it is up to you if you would like to keep a notebook. I highly suggest having a notebook with you that you can title 1.1 independent and dependent variables, and there you can jot down any notes that you think are important. I wouldn't recommend copying every single thing down, but maybe just the key important things that you see might help you when you do your assignments later on. All right, so independent and dependent. We'll start off by writing down independent and labeling this with our variable, either x or y. Independent variable is always the x variable, and the dependent variable is always the y variable. So if we were to graph these on some coordinate plane, the independent variable goes on the x-axis and the dependent variable goes on the y-axis. And all this means is that this x variable down here, they are free to do whatever they want. And what happens is, depending on what this dude does, that affects the y coordinate. That affects the dependent variable. A couple things. First thing is that usually when we're talking about actual context, actual situations, time is usually independent. About 99% of the time, if time is a variable, it's probably going to be the independent variable. All right, I put that in red. That's a pretty important thing. All right, so let's talk about our first situation. So there's a relationship between time and height of a tree. The tree grows at a constant rate of 4 feet per year. Identify the independent quantity and the dependent quantity. So we have to identify two different quantities. So if I read this problem again, or just the situation, there's a relationship between time and height of a tree. They give you two quantities, time and height. The tree grows at a rate of 4 feet per year. They are the two quantities. You have time and you have height. So we have to figure out which one is the independent and which one is the dependent. Well, remember the little trick I said about independent. If you ever have a unit or a quantity that is time, or a measurement of time, that is always going to be your independent. And in this problem, we actually do have time. Right? And specifically, what time are we talking about? The tree grows at a constant rate of 4 feet per year. So in this situation, years is our unit of measure. We're measuring time in years. So our independent quantity is time. Well, what is the dependent quantity? What is the other quantity? Well, that's the height of the tree. All right, and how are we measuring the height of the tree? Are we measuring in inches, in meters, in feet, miles? Well, in the problem it says 4 feet per year. So we're measuring height in feet. So put the quantity outside, and then in parentheses you can put the whatever it is that the unit of measure is for that specific variable. Okay, so in this situation, time is independent and the dependent quantity is height. So what does it mean when it says explanation? Well, we want to be able to explain what these two things, how they're related. All right, I'm going to give you a little formula here that's very, very, very helpful when explaining these things. If you are taking down notes, I would at least write down this formula. That formula is whatever the dependent quantity is, whatever that is, it depends on the independence quantity. Okay, so I know that may not make sense right away, so let's see. I want you to think about this. The height of the tree and time. We said that time is independent and the height is dependent. So if I were to rewrite this sentence, and what was our dependent quantity? It's height. The height, and I'm going to add of the tree, so we know what we're talking about, depends on the, now we have time, right? And on the time that has passed. Okay, so the height of the tree depends on basically how many years have passed. It's as simple as that. So a good formula is this one right here. The dependent quantity depends on the independent. All right, so talking about everything again. Independent is your x variable. Dependent is your y variable. If you ever see time in a situation, usually that one is the independent variable. So let's go ahead and jump to number 2. Eliana starts saving money by depositing $100 each week within her bank account. $100 each week. Identify the independent and dependent quantity in this situation. All right. Now notice I underlined $100 and week. I can also underline money. Really what we're talking about, $100 is it's a measurement of money. And we also have weeks there. So we're talking about money and weeks. All right. Now ask yourselves, are either of those two things a measurement of time? And yeah, weeks is definitely a measurement of time. And if time is in our problem, we know that that is going to be our independent quantity. And we are measuring times in this problem with weeks. Okay, now for dependent quantity, this happens a lot, so please do not make this mistake. In the past, I've had many students that for the dependent quantity, they'll say, oh, isn't it money? I'm like, yeah, you're right, it is money. So the kids will say something like this, oh, well, that's $100. And no, that's not correct. $100 is like a specific amount. I just want the very general thing that we're talking about. Very generally, we're just talking about money. I don't care about the $100, right, y'all? Okay, so just money. And how are we measuring money? Well, we may be in the U.S. because we're talking about dollars. All right, so the explanation. How can I connect these two things? Well, remember the little formula up here. All right, the dependent depends on the independent. The dependent, so which one is the dependent? The money. So the money, and let's put some context in here. The money that Eliana saves depends. For your explanation, you're always going to want to have the word depends in there in between your two variables. So the money that Eliana saves depends on the time that has passed. All right. That's it for today, guys. And just remember key things. Independent is X, dependent is Y. Time is usually independent. And a little formula for the sentence is the dependent quantity always depends on the independence.